Hey, what's going on everybody? Blade here and welcome to my Mont build guide. Today I'll be going over the dupes, skill priorities, best weapons, gear sets, team comps, and more to pretty much help you utilize her abilities to the best as she can. If you ever decide to pull for this character, this will be the video for you. So let's go ahead and get started. So jumping straight into the kits and passes here, Mont is our new dual typing Wind and Ice single target DPS who really brought a new side to P5X here, covering two whole elements. This is the first to really be seen in game, and with this new mechanic or typing situation, she also brings in two different playstyles. Depending on each of her elements here, she can do some interesting things as well. Wind is bringing up the DPS side to the equation here, while Ice is actually bringing up the massive sustainability that we had YUSUKE for, but we didn't technically know that we needed more. Depending on each of these forms here, you'll be utilizing her totally different. So we're actually gonna go ahead and break it down by explaining a little bit more, which this is gonna be a long one. To start, all of Mont's damage here is in the Wind form, or the mid-spring form here. This allows her to inherit the Wind element or use the Wind element for the most part, changing her moveset accordingly. Once in this form, she deals some high tier damage while also being able to use multi-hits on some of her moves. This keeps her being at least a heavy pressure DPS no matter what she's facing, where it's like a boss or just a regular old enemy, she's able to crank out some high tier damage. One of the things that she can really offer with this kit as well when she's in the Wind form is the Wind injury. This allows you to decrease defense abilities here on an enemy that's in front of you, which pretty much knocks down the defense by 12% minimum. Whenever she actually is on the Wind side here, if she's dealing too much damage to be comprehended, the only thing that's a downside is her team is a little bit squishy. So you do have to keep that in mind. But when we go ahead and take a look at her other side, being the Ice side, instead she inherits the Ice element here, which her movesets do change as well. But with this, instead of being a defense or at least a DPS factor, she now becomes a brick wall of just defense. This allows her to really inflict freeze on different characters once she does use certain moves, which also can allow her to actually use certain moves to proc an Ice Seal. This here is a little bit different because with Ice Seal, she actually can stop enemy actions, which just totally skips their whole turn. So that's actually an interesting deal that they ended up bringing into her kit. And now that we went over a little bit of a small rundown of what they really do, let's go ahead and talk about themselves and how they really affect her. So going over at least the first passive here named Cherish, this actually increases the Wind damage and or the Ice damage by 33% when there are other Wind and Ice allies. It's pretty much a short and sweet little passive here, but Longing is a little bit different and it does change on the form you're in. Now Longing is her secondary passive here. Whenever you are actually in the mid-spring form, every time you have an ally that does Wind damage, she will actually increase all allies' attack by 8.1% for 2 whole turns. This can actually stack up to 5 times, so you're getting yourself a decent bit of damage, around like 40% maximum, if you're actually using those allies to increase that said Wind damage or deal that Wind damage to increase your attack overall. This is heavily based on at least DPS, so whatever you want that's DPS wise is going to come from this. As for at least the Winter side, or at least the defense side here, Winter Knight form increases all your allies' defense by 9% for 2 whole turns. This can actually be stacked up to 4 times instead of 5 times, if I'm correct. And as long as you are gaining a shield. If you have no shield on this, then you're automatically going to be losing out on this. But luckily for the Ice team, you'll easily be getting that shield, especially since you're going to be running her with YUSUKE. So keep that in mind. But all in all, that was a freaking mouthful. Let's go ahead and go into the dupe section because geez, that was crazy. So as many of you guys know, I'm a little bit of a stickler for at least getting characters to dupes, and after using this character, I don't find the dupes actually needed. But for some of you who want to invest, I won't judge too much at least. But we're gonna go ahead and get started on the A0. A0 for Mont here allows her to actually freely switch between both of her forms if no domain is active. Depending on also if you go ahead and start the match here, if you have more Ice characters, you actually will start in that Ice form. Or if you actually have more Wind characters, you'll start in that Wind. So this is just something that she automatically has just by getting the character. Pretty short and sweet, nothing too crazy. But then we come into the A1 where things start to get a little bit complicated. Now for at least mid-spring at A1, every time you gain a Morning Dew crystal or just one of the crystals, you can actually use mid-spring domain. Or at least each time you open this mid-spring domain, you get 1 crystal. Once it does end, it actually increases your follow-up damage by 8% up to 40%. for each Morning Dew crystal. Now, something similar happens with Winter Night form as well. Pretty much once the Winter Night domain does end, you gain yourself a Frost Crystal. Once it does happen here, it increases the follow-up damage from 8% up to 40% based on how many Frost Crystals you have. Pretty much the same thing, just with a different form. Nothing too crazy. Then we have the A2. A2 itself is called Mid-Spring form, or at least has the Mid-Spring form side of it, which decreases the defense of all enemies by 40%. Now, this is only when the mid-spring domain is active, so you're getting that 40% decrease as long as you have that active. But this also decreases the SP cost for all allies by 25%. Now, the ice side does something similar here, but it also increases ice damage. Instead of decreasing the enemies, it actually increases your ice damage for all allies by 30% as long as the Winter Night domain is active. This decreases your SP cost by 25% as well, but unlike of course where you would think wind would be getting that actual damage increase, it's kind of opposite. We get the damage, or at least get the defense decrease for wind, and we get ice damage increase for ice, which is really cool. Then we're going to go ahead and take a look at the A4. Inside of mid-spring form here, whenever using her highlight, if a domain is active, she will gain at least an additional crystal that can exceed the cap. Though if there is no domain that's active, it will increase the highlight damage. Same thing can be said for the Frost one, where at least we gain an additional crystal that can exceed capping, but if that is not proc, or at least not proc with the domain, of course it only increases the highlight damage by 25%, which isn't bad, but still kind of there. At least. Then we get to talk about the A6. A6 is where the big things come into play here. So for mid-spring form, after triggering the follow-up, if a mid-spring domain is up and then it ends, it will then actually be extended by one whole turn. This allows you to gain 2 Morning Dew crystals, and once triggered, the follow-up will actually happen again at the end of the domain. So you technically get 2 follow-ups out of it. For this, it will increase the follow-up's defense pin by 4% up to 20%, but this also depends on the domain ending and how many Morning Dew crystals you do have. Now, the same thing can be stated for the Winter Night one, as of course here, after of course triggering a follow-up, you can extend this domain once again by 1 turn. Now, you will get 2 Frost Crystals out of this, much like how you got the Morning Dew crystals, and once you actually trigger that follow-up again, it will actually increase the follow-up defense pin up to 4% all the way up to 20%, which was pretty much the same as stated earlier. Pretty much mirrored, but they do work kind of different. So now if we went over all the dupes, let's go ahead and go over the skill priority. So finally getting to the juicy parts of the video here, Mont is very much so a character that simply just needs everything maxed out. You're going to be using this character for anything, and it's just going to be really situational based on either where you're going to be using her for wind, aka pure DPS, or ice for purely sustainability. So when it comes down to the skill priority here, you just want to max everything out, but if you're a little bit picky like me, this would be the order you want to go in. I would suggest, especially if you're going for the wind side of things, to use skill 3 into skill 1, later being skill 2 into the combat skills or the highlight. Either way, as I said beforehand though, you'll be maxing everything, so depending if you really want to go ahead and just do that, do it as fast as possible. But there is no full rush because everything on her is really useful. Now, checking out the weapon options. So weapon wise, this character in my opinion doesn't need a 5-star weapon. There's not many characters that I truly say that about here, but for this one, her 4-star weapon, Lady of Mistral, is actually pretty decent. It increases her attack percent for 12% at base, all the way to a max of 24%, while also giving her a permanent attack percentage from 1.8% to 3.3% based on how many Morning Dew crystals or Frost crystals that she had. This, no matter what, just gives you a overall attack boost, which is pretty darn decent. And if you actually do pair it with the crit rate set you'll have on her later, it kind of does what the 5-star does for the most part, but there are some things it's missing. Now, if you decided to be crazy like me and get the 5-star option, Dreamland and Swan, this not only increases her attack a little bit extra by 6%, being a 30% at base, up to 57% for any of you crazy people who are maxing out the weapon, but it also increases her crit rate every time we gain one of the crystals. This actually can scale up from 5.4% up to a max of 10.2% for 2 whole turns and 3 stacks. This is already a decent amount. If we add this up, it's pretty much around like 16% on at least that actual crit rate percent, which is really nice. But it does have an additional effect. This allows you to increase your ice and wind damage based on each time you open the domain that she actually utilizes here. This is going to be up to at least 22% at base, going all the way up to 41.5% for 2 whole turns. It's a really good weapon, but for the 4-star, I would also say you can kind of opt out of getting the 5-star weapon, though do keep in mind you are missing 2 additional factors which are kind of interesting but can be compensated for with an artifact set after. But now we're talking about artifacts, let's go ahead and get into the next section. So speaking about the artifacts or the best gear sets for at least Mont here, I have to be honest, this one was pretty annoying to figure out. It took a lot of testing. It took me speaking with Najox and a lot of other people to finally get down with the best gear set for this character. And the best one hands down is going to be Strength and Harmony. This is something that's been tested damage wise all in all. And the main reason that you'll be utilizing this is because it really is just a set that increases your overall attack. This set as a 2-piece here actually increases your attack by 12%, and which isn't gated by having the ice or having to do a follow-up or even having to be wind. It's just an overall useful start. But if you get the 4-piece, it gets even better. Pretty much each turn that you go by, you will actually gain 10% attack for 6 whole turns, which this can be stacked up to 3 whole times, giving you a huge buff on attack damage. And whether you're doing follow-ups, basic attacks, it won't matter. This set will be the best that you can really do and utterly help you out in damaging. Only downside to it is it does take a lot of grinding. It is going to be a set that you need to have some long-term commitment to, because if you want her to do the most that she really wants to do, you have to be very picky. Now, once paired of course with the Harmony Universal card, it'll increase the damage bonus by 10% as well, but this is not only for her, this is for all allies regarding the same element. So you're usually going to have another ally that's with that same element, aka Wonder, who's going to be kind of a necessary staple if you're doing wind, or if you're doing ice, you'll just have the entire team being the same element here. And with this allows you to do better overall, not only with just the team, but also the character. So if you're using ice or wind, this is already a good set effect to actually have as the universal card. Now there are other options such as Freedom plus Triumph set, which is meant for follow-up, but follow-up is only 1 through 3, or 1/3 of her actual DPS output. Now, not to mention, since it mainly does take a little bit of a commitment to the wind form here, wind form already takes down enough defense. So with the pin rate that the card actually kind of gives you as well, it is very bad, because since you're already taking down the defense pin, or at least that defense in general, defense pin isn't really doing much for you. So it's kind of bad compared to actually heavily investing into the power set. Then of course you have the next artifact set, which is Luxury plus Focus. Now this one is a follow-up damage set here, but it's only a follow-up damage set. So once again, this is only 1/3 of her actual DPS output. Though if you're wailing and you went for A6 like a crazy person, I mean, hey, this is the set for you. You're going to be dealing a lot of more follow-up damage attacks here, so it's going to be more often than not. So I mean, this will be the set that you go for, but only if you're A6ing. Otherwise, that you don't really got to go for this set. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the main stats when it does come down to it. If you are going for the main stats and you're going for any of these cards, I would suggest using a attack percentage moon, a crit rate star, and an attack percentage planet. Now, I'm a little bit crazy and I like to kind of gamble on at least if I can get my crit rate to be perfect on substats. So I use a crit damage star, which is a little bit optimal to some extent, but you are taking a little bit of a gamble. So do truly keep that in mind. Crit rate star is going to be better, but if you can somehow just get some crazy insane crit rate substats, you might can utilize the crit damage star instead. For substats, try to stack up as much as possible for crit rates, crit damage, attack percentage, and lastly damage bonus. This is pretty much the best order to go into, where damage bonus is kind of at the end of the ladder, but crit rate, crit damage, and attack percent are your main ones that you really want to be looking at. All in all, if you follow this, it'll really help you prep your Mont, or at least perfect your Mont to the best that she can be, especially if you're heavily investing. Though if you just want the old just build and then go with the Freedom and Triumph set, it's just going to be the quickest to really get some good things out of her, and then you can just keep on moving on. But now if we talk about this, let's go ahead and go to the team comps. Finally getting down to the final parts of the video here. Team comps are a big thing for Mont. This is kind of going to determine if she's going to be an ice character, a wind character, however she'll actually move out here, and the options she can really cover. So if we go ahead and check on the wind form first, which is the form that a lot of people are utilizing the most here, the main team setup is something like you'll see on the screen here. You'll try to use Vino, Ford, and Futaba for the best in her slots here, allowing you to really rush highlights, apply status elements, and increase weakness damage overall. This is an overall good team if you're trying to go for DPS damage all the time. It's going to be her best team in slot no matter what. But if you don't have some of these characters available, another team you can very well utilize, especially if you're early game as well, is Florette, Morgana, and Phoebe. This is actually allowing you to do the mono win team type of deal, which now pretty much puts Phoebe into play. And this kind of can monopolize a lot of her full on set. Seeing that there are multiple win characters in here, you can get way more out of this than not. So this team, without a doubt, is actually performing very, very well. Tested it many times inside of Velvet Trials and things of that nature, and it is actually a really good team. But of course, that's just the win side of things. Go ahead and check out the ice side. So for the ice team here, it's just a literal brick wall. You shouldn't have any problems at least sustaining your team with this one here, because you'll have Yusuke, Cherish, and Futaba once again at your side here, allowing you to not only weakness implant, but also have those counters and shields at your disposal. This ultimately is just the best defense team you could really ask for. There's nothing better than this out there. So if you are missing Cherish and or Futaba, you can very well replace both of them with Yuki being a 4-star and Phoebe once again being a 5-star. This overall is pretty darn decent to go ahead and go with. You're getting those basic HP, defense, and attack at least statuses here, while also having some decent defense for not only just a single character being Mont or Yusuke, but then once of course Yuki uses her skill 3, a shield for everyone. Unfortunately for you guys who wanted Yusuke to kind of go away, he's here to stay. Doesn't matter what team you use him with, as long as it's ice, he's going to be in there. Now, as for personas are where things get a little bit interesting for Wonder. This was something that I decided to add in because a lot of you guys asked for this as well. But if you're using the wind form here, try to use Vishnu, Norn, and Narcissus. I think I put them at least in the video for this one here, so hopefully future me remembers that here. But once you use them three, make sure you pair it with the Elemental Dagger. The Elemental Dagger will really help you monopolize a lot of that wind side of things. Now, if you are using the ice form, Asperos is going to be another one that you could very well use. Dionysus and Succubus will all be a at least persona you can use for the man Wonder, really kind of manipulating a lot more of that ice DPS factor. Because now, since we do have, of course, Mont in the team, crit is going to be more of the deal that you want to go for. So having those crit personas here and really offensive personas is going to help you out in the long run. Not to mention, once paired with Palace 3 Mechanic Dagger, this will help you out a lot, especially once it comes down to at least squeezing a lot more of that DPS out of here. And lastly, I didn't really want to make this one kind of a last minute second timestamp, but I probably will anyways. This is going to be the mental image. Now, I have to thank to the Jocks for this one. He made this infographic and it's absolutely amazing here. But for people who are at in-game and are willing to invest into this character, look at that little screenshot right there, or at least that infographic right there. You want to follow this head to head, mainly to get the best out of those mental image buffs here for the girl Mont. But anyways, thank you again, the Jocks, and let's go ahead and end it on out. So thank you guys for all actually paying attention to this one. I'm sorry it took me so long with actually coming up with this whole video. It was a lot of stuff and your boy was kind of a little bit busy, but when it came down to it, I hope you guys really do enjoy it. I was actually doing some keyframing myself, which was the little beginning slide in function. It looks a little funky, but I know what I want to really go for now, and it looks kind of to a liking that I like it. And as always, thanks to all the edits for my man Elise Chills. He's going to be an upcoming type YouTuber that's going to be going into the P5X community as well. I'll leave the link to his channel whenever he actually wants that up. Once he does have it up, I'll put it into the video, and he does my edits and he's absolutely amazing with it. So thanks once again for that. And as always, if you guys enjoyed it, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Peace out.